Hi, welcome to the Hidden Gifts of Loss podcast. And today I have Alison Pickering as my guest, and she's the host of the Follow Your Road podcast. And we met through Stacy, and we're just meeting here for the first time. But so I was going to tell her and you all a little bit about my background, why I started this podcast. I lost my mom to pancreatic cancer in 2020, right in the middle of COVID. And then 1 year later, I lost my dad and to COVID and heart failure. And after I went through that loss, I just felt myself becoming this new person. I went through this grief, like really hardcore grief for about a year that I just surrendered to. I was like, you know what? The only way through this is through it. And then one of the gifts that I got from my parents was that there was an inheritance that my brother and I got. So I was somebody who was working in this corporate job that I absolutely hated. And I knew that I was supposed to be doing something else, but I felt really trapped. So that was like the first of many hidden gifts. And it was a play on words because my mother, she was a very organized hoarder. She had hundreds of Sterilite bins of gifts in her garage and in her house. And my brother and I had to go through everything. And it was just funny because most of the stuff was brand new stuff that she'd never used, but it was on sale. So that was my mother's thing. Long story shortish, I wanted to start a podcast because what helped me getting through all that grief was talking about it. And I had an end of life doula, and we would talk once a week for an hour every Sunday. And because of her encouragement and her validation, I thought I should start a podcast because there's probably a lot of people that would like to talk about this. But I didn't know how to start a podcast or if I really even was qualified to start a podcast. And then I met Stacy Lauren and in her Find Your Voice challenge. And then I just jumped in. I'm like, you know what? It doesn't have to be perfect. I'm just going to do it. So now I get to meet all kinds of cool people and we have these really wonderful conversations. So I met Allison through Stacy and I invited her on. And so I'm going to let her tell us more about her. And if there's something that you have gone through, some kind of loss, we've all gone through a loss, but I'm always interested in knowing how that changed you as a person and what were some of the good things that came through that you probably were not expecting when you were right in the middle of dealing with all of that loss and grief. But how is it for you now? And how did you transform? So
Thank you.
welcome.
Those are the monumental questions, aren't they? It's so nice to meet you, and thank you so much for having me on your podcast, on this broadcast.
Thank
I
you.
We have a little bit in common in that my grandfather had their when he was a kid in Iowa, their farm auctioned out from under them under bankruptcy. Later, as an adult in California, he used his big brawn to be a moving man, and when people wouldn't collect all the last of their stuff, he would have it all, and he had, over the years, warehouses full of stuff, and my mother would sell and work the shop and all this kind of stuff. There was always warehouses full of stuff, and it was always great stuff, and he was a little bit of a squirreler too, so my aunts and uncles and mother spent, like, 2 years every weekend going through the house because it might be some gorgeous ring of stellar gorgeous ring because he would collect really good stuff, but it would be rolled up in toilet paper in a Brillo box under the sink. He
I
had to
know.
go through this old, funky, dirty house to that degree, and he had packed it like a moving truck, like all those Sterilite bins. I imagine you're like, "Oh my god, which wall and department are we gonna conquer
Yeah.
today?"
Yeah. It was crazy going through all that stuff. And we had to do it fast because we needed to sell our house as quickly as we
Oh my
could. I'd say 150 of the bins were just Christmas
Oh my
stuff,
god,
right?
150 for Christmas. Look at that. That's wild. My mother tried to organize herself before she decided to go, shall we say. So I was blessed with an organized woman who had a very abundant house because she loved her stuff. And so there was a ton of stuff, but it was all really gorgeously arranged and ultimately pretty well organized. And so that certainly has been the task of some years. So what are some of the hidden gifts of loss? I've in hidden gifts of loss. When I was 17, my stepmother got very ill with a very fast. We didn't know that she had cancer because she was also pregnant with my stepbrother. And so my father ended up with three very small children and no wife and no support from her family. And so my mother and stepfather were around. And so we always had a blended family. So that's a big gift. They divorced when I was younger, but they never put the stuff in front of me. So a gift of that was that they decided to be really discreet and not make me witness to whatever made it impossible for them to live together because they loved each other, but for sure they would have killed each other, and I get that, and then my father himself passed away when those kids were, like, 17. So 17, 19, 20, and of a very accelerated, horrible thing, and with lots of, like, irony, but it gave us a chance. For example, he was someone who had been so this is a wonderful blessing. Thank you for asking such a wonderful question. So let me focus on what was a very hard time. This was right around the 1994, 95.
Mm.
I was married at the time, and my husband and we were gonna go spend a month in Sedona, and he was gonna write his thesis, and I was gonna, like, commune with nature. I don't know, we were gonna do something for a month in Sedona. It sounded good to me. And then my other sister, who was maybe, like, 25. This is my half sister whose mother had died when she was a kid. She was off with her boyfriend. They had got it together to go to Europe and they were going to see how long they could make the money last. And then my other sister was like on a movie job out of town. And all of a sudden, we all like homing pigeons. I just one day woke up and I'm like, listen, I know it's only been like 4 days, but I really want to go home. And so I came back home and my sister came back from, I think they were in Czech Republic or Czechoslovakia at that point. They came back and then my sister, anyway, we all ended up back home in time for my father's birthday where he told us that he had cancer,
Oh,
which was very bad. And he had a big beard. And what we didn't know was that under that beard was a big old thing that is a whole big long story, but was a very short story in terms of how long that lasted, but because he had been such a generous guy over the and he was a super handsome guy. He never liked playing up how handsome he was, even though he's an actor, but he didn't like playing it up, and so it was always full of irony, and so he ended up
mhm.
very figured.
Oh,
He saw all the sides of the spectrum, and so did we, and it was all very but the hidden gift in that was our coming together to take shifts, for example. Where am I going with this? That we were there like homing pigeons to get that news and to be there so that
yeah, like, you didn't know
yeah.
that. You all just felt like you should go home.
Exactly,
Wow.
and there we were, and it was a big deal, and because they had lost their mother to cancer, so the cancer word was just unthinkable, and I
Mhm.
was already 35 at this point, but they were in their teens and early 20s, and so is that right? 95? I don't even know. I
It
was
all blurs
35
together after a
minus
while.
14 yeah, 24, 17, 17 to 24.
That's young to
It
lose a
doesn't
parent.
matter. Here's what mattered. So to get back to your point, Julie, in terms of this wonderful theme that you have on your podcast. He had worked as he was an actor, but the acting thing never really played out. And so what he did to make a living when he had to make a living and be the father to the three kids and hold down that job was commercials and movies
Mm.
doing electrical grip work and all that kind of film crew behind the scenes technical work.
Yeah.
And those are 3 days at a time, 5 days at a time, 3 days, and so it's never like a steady thing, so everything's always insecure. And
Mm.
when this happened was such a catastrophic medical thing that many things were at risk. And but my mother and stepfather had a lot of experience as kind of community organizers and fundraisers, and they had my stepfather and father had both been usually on opposite sides of the same question in their trade union together, where they both worked in that industry. And then we sent out some notes just saying, maybe you knew, maybe you didn't know, but Bob has been sick, and it would be really helpful if you want to give any gifts or something, and like that. And in 50s and 25s and $100 checks did $11,000 come in. And this was back in 1995. So it meant that house could be kept.
Wow, what a blessing.
Yeah, exactly, and it meant that his wall could be festooned with all of these different wonderful cards from his coworkers to whom he
Mhm.
had been so generous.
Oh, yes.
So I have
Wow.
wonderful
Oh,
parents to follow their examples.
wow.
And one guy named the theater after him where he did a lot of the lighting and stuff, so I remember going some years later. So there's all kinds of surprises.
Yes. Oh, that's beautiful.
So I went to the bank the other day, and the guy was still there who had been so cool with me to deposit all those crazy checks that were, like, made out to me or made out to him, but I needed to deposit it in my account.
Oh,
And I'm like, "Man, thank you, Minute for being so cool. I remember that." When there you
wow.
go, there you go. It's your turn, Julie. I pulled myself together here.
So, yeah. Oh, thank you for sharing that and being so vulnerable. The we had similar things like that too when I went back out to California to get ready to sell the house. At this point, my dad was still alive, but he wasn't going to be able to go back because he had fallen and he just wasn't able to walk anymore. And there were steps. So he wasn't going to be able to go back. So my brother and I we were overwhelmed by the amount of stuff. And so we needed to sell the house. And so I said, we'll have a garage sale, right? We've been moving stuff to Goodwill and trying to get rid of everything. And of course, back when my mom was dying, it was COVID and nobody was taking donations. So a huge hidden gift was that her hospice nurse turns out was just as big of a Christmas fanatic as my mother. She said that her husband called her Mrs. Claus. She took 100 bins
Wow.
of Christmas, right? So that left us with a little bit less. But anyway, like when it was time to have a garage sale, I reached out to one of my mother's friends. And within 15 minutes, I had 5 or 6 tables, plastic tables to set up in the driveway to put all the stuff on. And like my daughter and I, thank God there was like stimulus money at that time because of COVID. So there's a little hidden gift from COVID because both of us, my daughter came too. Neither one of us worked for 3 months because that's what we did. We took care of my mom. And I told her friends, don't give us flowers because we're leaving. My dad doesn't care about flowers there. And so they all gave like a gift card or some money, like to get us back home. And so it was just all those little things. They're little, but they're so big at the time when you need them.
And they also show you I think the biggest gift at that point in time is the reordering of priorities.
Oh, yes.
So that you see that the $10 or the casserole or the somebody coming over and feeding your dog or whatever it is, that it's going to be to help you out, a little gesture, a little something or other, some kind of reciprocated generosity because your mother, look how generous she was. And so all that coming back to her, she was very prodigious in that way. So prodigiously, probably, are you seeing a lot of that return, I would hope. And
Mhm.
so that's certainly a beautiful gift. So that reordering of priorities so that you recognize that job is just not important. That appointment with so and so is not important. The tune up is not whatever it is. But the person who came over or thought of you or sent you this card that just really touched you in that moment that you needed someone to remember that you were still there because it's been like a year and you're still depressed, but everybody else forgot, all that kind of stuff.
Yes.
Especially in COVID, maybe were you alone after your parents had died? Who did you stay with during all that
Oh,
time?
we stayed at their house and it was a very small house. And
Oh,
so it was my daughter and my parents and I. And once COVID hit, we set her up with hospice. And then a week later, LA went on lockdown. And so all these friends who had been coming by and bringing food and sitting with her and everybody, it all stopped. Even hospice was reduced to non-emergency just phone calls unless it was an emergency. Yeah, we were very isolated. My brother lives in LA
LA in
too.
the house. So you were all in LA for the COVID.
Mhm.
Your parents both got sick and passed away while you were all in the house together.
Yeah, my mom was diagnosed in January of 2020.
Ay, ay,
I
ay.
flew out on Valentine's Day. At that point, I COVID was still something that was in China. And I remember there was a
Well,
few
yeah,
people that
we were
had
in China.
masks.
At the end and so get this, so there was a really too big of a lag, let me just say that because we after I retired right before COVID, and my coworkers, I'm so sorry, but I'm so relieved." Took a trip, and we went to Hong Kong and Singapore, and already at the end of December, people were, like, masking up, but I'm thinking it's cultural, it's whatever, it's, what they do or whatever.
Yeah.
But then we had to take the flight home from Singapore through Hong Kong, where my husband spotted Michelle Yeoh, by the way. He's very good at spotting anyone, anywhere. So that the actress Michelle Yeoh, She was there, but they were testing temperatures. There were people in hazmat suits who were taking laser temperature gun things
Wow.
as we were coming down the terminal hallway to change flights, and they were keeping us very isolated from the rest of the terminal. You really had to go only in these particular kind of routes, and so we're like, "Okay, whatever, because we don't know this airport, whatever."
Exactly.
And I'm, like, sharing lozenges because my throat has already started to get sore, and
Oh
I'm in
my
the middle
God.
of the row 12 across, and I'm giving lozenges. "Here's would you like a Ricola?" to this lady next, so then I came home, and I was sick as a dog, and I thankfully survived. That did not happen on your side. I'm so sorry, but that was already December 26th, and when was the lockdown? Middle of March?
Yeah. Yep. Mhm. Yep.
So you came out for your mom, she got diagnosed, and then the lockdown happened here?
Yeah, I came out on Valentine's Day when it was just yeah, we'd heard about it, but we didn't think it was just like, "Oh, wow, that's horrible what's happening in China. Oh my God." And I saw some people with masks, and my wife gave me a mask. It was one of those Series N95 masks. She's always much more on top of it with the news and stuff. And I'm like, "I don't know. I don't really know if I wanna know this,"
Yeah,
right? She's like, "I
similar
really
to
want
my
you to wear
husband, and
this
he's never
mask,"
gotten
right?
it, by the way. I've gotten it 3 times, and he's never gotten it.
Oh my God,
So
yeah, she's
bless your
gotten
wife
it,
for
I've never
protecting
gotten
you.
it. So I
Bless her
have this
for protecting you.
mask, but I've got my headphones and I've got my neck rest, and I'm like, "This is really uncomfortable. I feel claustrophobic. I am not wearing this mask," because we weren't taking it seriously. Nobody was. And so for,
In Sweden, they had anti-mask laws. If you chose to wear them, they would give you a hard time. It was so bizarro.
my God, I know, yeah, all the maskers and stuff. Yeah, and even when it happened, I remember when the lockdown was announced, I had been staying with my brother and sister-in-law, and because my mom's house was so small that it was just my daughter staying there, and I was just every day going back and forth. At this point, my mom was still able to do things, and then they announced lockdown. So I was like, I can't keep going back and forth. I'm going to have to quarantine. I'm going to have to stay in one location. And even my sister-in-law, she even said, "This is America. Nothing's going to happen here." That was like how people were
It's
thinking.
unthinkable what they
Yeah.
did, and that's the shift, all the wonderful things that happened, plus now the banks take 3% of absolutely every transaction because nobody does anything with cash anymore. Yeah.
I know. Oh my gosh. And my poor daughter, she was so paranoid about everything, like to an extent way beyond what I was. It's
How
just
old
that
was your daughter?
she was 24 at the time. Yeah. And
My
she
niece
was working as
my
an archaeologist and left her job to come out and
Oh,
take care of grandma.
wow.
Yeah. But
Don't you woulda had to you woulda had to land somewhere during that crazy
she
time,
would have
huh?
had to. Yeah. And fortunately, she drove out because when my mom passed April 30th, we had to drive home. Growing up right by LAX and then not hearing planes,
Wow.
that was eerie.
You don't recognize that you're used to hearing that big thunder every 5 minutes or so, you know?
Uh-huh. And we would sit outside and just be like, "Oh my gosh, it's so quiet here. What is going on?" My dad and I
Hear
drove
the
through
Beach
the
Boys.
airport. Yeah. We drove through the airport just to see what was going on. My dad and I, it was after my mom passed, and literally there was no traffic at LAX. And if you've ever been to LAX, and I'm sure you have, I've never seen anything like it. I don't even think they
It
could
was it
clear it
was
out like that for a movie if they had to.
they had all these photographs, like, in Venice, Italy, of dolphins, like, frolicking in the canals. The way the nature came back quickly
Oh,
in
yeah.
in just whatever that was, and it's hard to believe that it was almost 3 years. Isn't it hard to believe?
No, yeah. Here in Ohio,
Was
'cause
that the right time
it
frame
was
to
3
the
years, yeah. It's
Oh
been
my
a little over 3 years since my dad died, and that was, like, 2021, so it wasn't, like, peak COVID, but it was still very much you had to mask and everything at that time. We had so much wildlife in our front yard. We do live surrounded by a lot of wooded areas, but we had deer coming to our yard. We had raccoons. We had just they've always been around, but we never saw them in such abundance as during that time, which was a little hidden gift of COVID.
as well as conversations such as these, because I don't know that any of us would have ventured into this kind of online community and communication and exploration of content and an exploration of vocation and purpose and voice and all that kind of stuff.
So true. I know I wouldn't have started a podcast. It's just in my wildest dreams, but it's such a good fit because I was a psychology major and then I spent 30 years doing hair. So it's just like doing hair, except for on Zoom.
It's so funny. I do this show. So I do an interview show and I do a tarot reading show where we kind of show how it's done in a high quality, conscientious, purposeful pattern, shall we say. And anyway, one of my adorable co-hosts gives us kind of one of the perspectives in there, and he has been doing hair for 100 years as well. He's done a bunch of rock stars as well, and he's a very good tarot reader, and his name is Mike Bonner, and we did an interview with him, and we also did his cards, I think, at one point. Yeah, I think his was the first show. And he has the nickname of, I don't know if you're familiar with tarot, but there's a teacherly, priestly figure called the Hierophant or the Hierophant, and he's the Hierophant or the Hierophant, and it's his musical artist name, but it's also because it's the confessional, and we come to you as with our little gray hair and our straggly heads and our needs to be made beautiful and all that kind of stuff, and you help us out, you do us you help us out, and we entrust ourselves to you, and and he talks about it in the interview at the end that somebody says that that's your mission, is that you take people at their kind of straggliest, tired, worn down, and then you talk to them, you revive them, you make them look beautiful, you give them a new helmet, you send them out in the world.
Yes. I know it was a funny thing to go to cosmetology school after graduating from college, but there were a bunch of extenuating circumstances, but it was something I'd always secretly wanted to do. And it just ended up being like the perfect blend because I'm only responsible for your hair. Yes, you are telling me all of your problems, which I welcome, please. Everybody confides in me, but I'm not responsible for that.
Oh my
Just the
god.
color of your hair. And so when you walk away, you feel so good.
I
And
love
yeah, it's been really fun. And so it's just when I had that realization, of course I can start a podcast, but this is what I've been doing forever. And Vicky Poole too, she does
Uh-huh.
hair. So
And she's got the
yeah.
pink hair, so the 2 of you are very well
Yep.
matched that way. It's a lot of fun. I was that lady who, before we started on the recording today, I mentioned this fashionista that my husband follows. This woman has 4 degrees in astrophysics or something. She's from Germany, but she read this book, which I haven't yet read, but I've read the outline. And it's called, speaking of the topic here, The 5 Regrets of the Dying, and it's by
Ooh,
Bronnie, where is she there? Bronnie Ware.
where?
Yeah,
Oh, I'm writing that down.
absolutely, absolutely, The 5 Regrets of the Dying, and I'll just quickly go over them if you want, and then,
Yes,
of course, you can
please.
screenshot when you have your recording there, but so after doing all that scientific work, she actually discovered that she loved styling fashion. She's tall and slim and beautiful, and she's very dramatic, and so that's what she does, and she's this massive YouTube person, and she's hilarious, and I love her, and she says, "Let's do it." So that's
Oh, yeah.
all right. Regret number 1. I wish I'd had the courage to live a life true to myself, not the life others expected of me. Can I get an
Mhm.
amen, right? So, all
Amen.
right. Regret number 2, I wish I hadn't worked so hard.
Yeah.
Number 3, I wish I'd had the courage to express my feelings. 4, I wished I'd stayed in touch with my friends. And 5, I wished I'd let myself be happier.
Wow.
And then it's got a little bunch of little subtitles about all the features of those particular ones, but all of those are worth contemplating, you know what
Oh,
I mean?
yeah.
So I'm
Absolutely.
looking forward to digesting this, but one of my issues is that I have what I call my road to hell, which is all of my unread books. It's all my good intentions because I love books, but I'm a slow reader. And I was a reading specialist for years and years, and I like did the standards and curriculum, and I can read, I can deal with it, I can proofread. But in terms of digesting it quickly for comprehension, it takes me a minute. And I realized that when I have, for example, in this tarot study group I've been in since COVID, what a
Yeah.
wonderful hidden gift of that,
Yeah.
because we met twice a week for 3 years and studied together and read cards together and supported each other and made friends together. It was the
Oh,
greatest well, so that's my
fun.
business, and that's what I'm trying to take to scale, is to a
Yes.
learning community with exchange and things, and then some travel meetups and events to
And
put,
I
like,
love tarot, by the way. I love tarot.
wonderful,
Been
wonderful.
playing
So
with it for years.
oh, good. So I hope you come on the show. I think we have a schedule,
Yeah,
don't
I
we?
think I'm on next Friday, if I'm not
What?
mistaken. Yeah, I'm very excited
Good.
about that.
That'll be fun. And so Why am I talking about this? So
Reading. You were talking about being slow at reading, but your road to hell.
all of the above. So yes, it was very fortunate to be in this tarot study group because there's people who English is their third or fourth language and they're powering through these books with high comprehension and I'm like, "Wow, okay." But they enjoy making PowerPoints and pre-digesting these books and sharing the content with us. And for example, we're reading a big honking book that I love and would love to read and actually have, but I look at it and I'm like, not today. But somebody else said yes today, and he's like giving it to us on Saturday as a slideshow. And it's brilliant because it's all visual. And
Oh,
it's all right-brained, and you're even reading right to left because there's Hebrew letters connected to it, for example, in this particular series that we're looking at right now, because each of the majors has a Hebrew letter associated with you made words and things like that. So, it's fascinating, it's wonderful, and it's brilliant to have a non-linear way to approach it, and that's another thing I love about tarot is that it is right-brained, it's a picture's worth 1,000 words, it has facilitated for me a lot of internal teaching, that allows me to really get the gist of a lot of what I read or a lot of what I outline, and I already have comprehended a lot, and so I feel very fortunate that way. Or maybe that's hubris, and I just need to read the books. It shall be determined when I read them.
oh my god.
Until then, I'm faking it till I make it, baby.
Oh, I love it.
So anyway, come on down because we're gonna do some master classes in the summer, and then we're gonna start this, like, academy thing in the fall, and then we're gonna have some cruises, and we're gonna have all kinds of stuff, so it's gonna be fun. Yeah,
Keep
yeah.
me in the loop. That sounds so
Yeah.
fun, and it's
Oh,
all around
definitely.
tarot. That is so
Well,
great.
not exclusively tarot because there's more to life than tarot, although tarot is great fun. Tarot is path work, and tarot is a lot of fun to play around with.
Mhm.
It's a joke,
Yeah.
okay? So,
Mhm.
if you don't wanna play around with a car, you know,
Exactly.
you
Yeah.
should be responsible with these things, but it does have those aspects to it. It's multifaceted so that it can be used as an internal contemplation tool as well as a very and this is really an oversimplification, a good filing system for lots of different knowledge,
Mhm.
as well as a fun thing to hang out with and just have as an internal conversation or as a conversation with friends, because it's like small talk, but more fun, and it's got a little cachet to it with the synchronicity and everything, so it's fun.
Yeah.
So we don't know,
So
as you
so
don't know.
yeah. So the group you're talking about is more around books and the presentations that the
We're
people
gonna
are
have
are doing
modules.
or
So we might have the tarot module, we might do a module on other oracles and I Ching, for
okay,
example.
okay.
We might do a module on tarot, the majors and their connection to the Kabbalistic tree of life. Throughout the whole thing, we are building the foundations for that so that you would never need to unlearn anything if you wanted to go deeper into esoteric study.
Wow.
So you're not learning bogusness, you're learning some stuff that's very congruent and coherent. And we're doing it in community, so we're nice people and we're thoughtful people and that kind of good stuff.
I love that.
Essentially, whatever the world thinks we're crazy because we operate in slightly different rhythm or direction, like the hangman, for example, as a
Yeah.
card is very much that way. We could do a whole thing on cards that represent loss and what the gifts are within that. We could do that as an episode if you want, Julie.
Yes. I'm
That'd be fun,
so
wouldn't it?
down for that. Yes.
Yeah, yeah. We could look
Oh
across different
my
decks
god.
too, because
I'm
people have
thinking
like
of this
different
deck that I
Mhm.
wanna show you.
Oh,
Hold
yeah,
on
yeah.
one second. Yeah, let me step over here. Yeah. You're in shape. Okay. Alright. So my friend, dear friend Laura Jo, who I've known forever and who's how I met the father, my daughter's father. It's called
Nice,
The
nice.
Medicine Woman Inner Guidebook by Carol Bridges, and every time she and I read from this deck, it's so spot on.
Wonderful.
Yeah, it gives you chills. And so while I was in California taking care of my mom, periodically we would talk on the phone and I'd pull a card and then we'd read it. And I remember the card I pulled on the day that I manifested all the tables for the garage sale. It was resources. It was all about how I use my resource to
Yeah,
create what
well,
I need.
and that's what's really entertaining on the show as well, is that it's very you never know what's gonna pop up, and it's always pretty hilarious in how relevant it is or how much there is to say about that, relative to the situation, et cetera, et cetera. Yeah, and then I follow a couple of readers and one of them who I love, she's very artful. she always has new and different decks, and since she has the Amazon links down below, and I'm like, "Ooh, click. Ooh, click."
Yeah.
The stack keeps getting bigger and bigger.
I
And
love it.
but what I'm thinking down the line, like, when we're doing the classes and things like that, is that we'll have some open hours for office hours and things like that, and then people can come and get free readings or whatever, and then we can pick whatever deck people wanna read with and stuff like that, depending on how we wanna use the interface. Because showing the cards is somewhat challenging, but we have a really nice interface for the Rider-Waite deck, which in
Mm.
itself is quite it's old school and people diss it, but it should not be dissed, and it's quite profound, and so there's quite a lot to get from it, and in addition, people diss it, but every single deck has been cloned from it, so let's get real.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. With a little bit of a different spin, but
Oh, yeah, and beautiful
it all goes
artwork,
back.
and also now with
Yes.
AI and with digital printing on demand, it's just, oh my god, it's the Wild West in terms of what's out there, but there's some old school stuff that's really worth exploring, and so that's what we're doing, as well as some of the new stuff because we're not averse to anything new. So it's very organic, and so, yes, AlisonPickering.com, and then get on the mailing list so that we can do that, and of course, you're already on the mailing list, Julie, so
Yeah. It's interesting that we're talking about this because one of the ideas that I had was to create a deck of the hidden gifts.
yes, is
It
that did you have a deck up that had those beautiful flowers? The
No,
affirmation?
I didn't what are you talking about? The flowers
So
on my wall or something else?
it
No,
made
but my friend Lori Jo, because I at one point, I don't even know where I wrote it down, but the hidden gifts that come to the top of my head would be like healing and forgiveness and resilience and compassion. And I brainstormed one day. I think I came up with 40 different ones. And I thought it would be so cool to take those and then have artwork done
oh,
to
yeah.
go with each one of those.
Wanted to, you could even do a shadow side of that for people, like, unprocessed or the gifts when they're hung on to, that kind of thing. So
Yes.
the forgiveness is gonna be the constant plague or the guilt or the load on the back, like Robert De Niro in that Mission movie or something, or and so you could even have because a lot of people will have, like, a reversal meaning.
Hmm.
I don't personally read reversals too much. I can, but it's not my preference
Hmm.
unless somebody really wants it. If they really want it, they can have it. There's enough to be concerned about in tarot that you don't need to be like, "Oh my god, that's a negative spin." You don't need to do that.
Right.
Um, so, um, anyway, and reading should be a lot of laughs anyway because it's all about getting down into interesting questions, but then not taking them so seriously that you're like, "Oh my god, the drama," because, most
Mhm.
of the stuff is our ego getting hooked and a lot of stuff that really requires more the patience of a parent saying, "Yes, honey, it's okay, I understand,"
Right.
more so than, yeah, I don't know, rape your wit or something along those lines.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. Oh my goodness. Do you feel like any of the losses or experiences that you went through, did any of that kind of lead you more on this path of the spiritual and the esoteric?
Oh, certainly. Okay. So, in I left a relationship, left the country, did a big leaving of, and went into another thing that was very somewhat tumultuous, but did lead me into some spiritual thinking. I had a tarot reading from a psychic that night, or that evening, shall we say. And then that night, I had one of these kinds of experiences where, for me, everything spiritual back behind, prior to that, let me say, I could be theoretical about spiritual things and God and the world beyond and whatever. After this experience, which was probably a half hour or something, like laying on the floor somewhere in Amsterdam in a hotel, just having this experience post this weird reading,
Mhm.
I had been doing a crossword puzzle and something in my head said, "You're doing such busy work. Why don't you do something more productive?" And I said, "Okay." And I did a few yoga poses and then I started to meditate. And that's when this thing happened. And it was very light blue, shall we
Mm.
say.
Like an energy.
Um,
Like a
yeah, yeah, it was an experience. It was very light blue. It was very happy. After that, when I came out of that, what used to be some theoretical consideration that I could banter about or whatever, if I denied it now, I would be committing a sin with a capital S. And I was not raised religious.
Mhm.
I didn't have that in my bank of fear, so to speak. But I knew that if I denied that experience, I would be lying, and that would be a big
Mhm.
S. capital S lying sin to deny that. So I was like, "Okay, that's qualitative." That's qualitatively different. And I was very buzzy for a long time. I don't
Wow.
know. The problem I had is that I attributed all that fabulousness to this man I was with.
Ah, this is the man that you were leaving?
No, the one that I
Okay.
had happened into who had poked my intellectual brain enough to make holes enough for this to get in, so to speak, but he was a little nutty. And so that was like a 3-year episode, but it was a good one. And then during my father's illness, which was very accelerated, as probably was your mother's with pancreatic cancer, it's
Yeah,
very shocking how fast
yeah,
those things go.
yeah, 3 months.
Oh my gosh, and my dad was 9, so you had very little time with your mama. Oh my gosh.
Mhm.
My condolences again because it's so recent. It's already been 30
Yeah,
years with my dad, and you saw how I was talking about that, and then my
yeah.
mom in 2016,
Uh,
my stepdad, 2014, and then 2 step siblings in the ensuing one during COVID and one before COVID.
um, my
Lots of
condolences
people, lots
too.
of beloved people. It's so
Lots of
crazy.
people, like, checking out on the planet. Seems like this
I
huge
well, maybe they're
wave.
checking back in as new babies, you never know, or
You
maybe they
never
found
know.
a new job and they could check themselves out of here and just say, "Okay, thank God I don't have to go back," you know?
That was a hidden gift was that I got those 10 weeks with my mom, because if I would have
Yeah.
waited, COVID
Yeah.
would have
Yes.
made that really difficult
Yes,
to
that
get
is
there.
as
But
it
I'm
did.
sorry, you were saying
When someone's sick, you get all so it's like, "What's gonna happen?" You want someone to predict the future, which is not the best purpose for these kinds of things,
yes.
you know?
Oh my
And
god,
so you
yes.
go looking, and so I went to this place out maybe you know it, it's out in the Sherman Oaks in the Valley, it's called The Psychic Eye. They may or may not still be there, but it was a big bookstore, and they had some little rooms in the back where they had some people there, and they could go read cards for you. So I went, and I remember asking this woman about my father's surgery, and the card that came up it was a little tiny deck. It was the cards were like about this big, and it was black and white. It was line drawings, and the card that came up was the 10 of swords, but the image of the 10 of swords in that particular deck was someone's head with 10 knives stuck in it, cutting all these things. Now, did my father have that many surgeries? Probably that
Oh my
many.
god, wait.
But of course, she was very nice, and she said, "Things are gonna be okay, you're gonna get past it, this is the end of the worst of it, blah, 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 blah," which is the responsible thing to say. Watch that Nora from Queens movie about them not wanting to tell the grandmother she's sick back in China.
Oh, yeah.
It's
Yeah.
so good, it's so good, that movie, I love that movie. So because there's so the mind is so powerful. That
Mhm.
lady's still alive, the grandma.
They yeah, they didn't
Oh, I just
tell
spoiled the movie for you.
no, no, I think I have there was things we didn't tell my mom, like, we never told my mom that the cancer had spread to her brain. She was having double vision. When I asked the hospice nurse what was going on, and she said that's what she told me. Our hospice nurse was just delightful, she was British. She said, "No, it's run to the nurse." That's what she would say when she called. She said, "Yes, it spread to her brain, love." When I was like, "There's no reason for us to tell her that. That's just gonna
No.
make it worse," you know, so we just never
Also, she
did.
was too embarrassed if she dropped something or whatever. It's just
Mhm. Yeah, yeah.
or dread it even more. Poor thing.
Exactly. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, just the suffering too to watch my mom. My mom loved life. She had a lot of anxiety and a lot of OCD, but she had so many friends. This woman sent out she exchanged Christmas gifts with 75 people and she kept a list of every single person and every single gift.
On her
And all,
back, and should she not be able to do it this year? Oh my gosh.
yeah, she pared it down over the years, but for her to get to the point during the cancer to say I'm she said I'm so disappointed every time I wake up. She said, "I just want this to be over." Oh. And that was not her. So the suffering, the pain, apparently pancreatic cancer is like one of the most painful cancers you can have because what happens is like your
Were you able
pancreas
to give her morphine?
she was on morphine and then fentanyl and Ativan and it was just this it just kept they kept
It's
increasing
always
it.
the choice. Do they wanna be lucid or out of pain?
Yeah.
Conscious or out of
Yeah.
pain? You
And
know,
she
and
was not somebody who liked taking medication, and so it was that was a balancing act and a little bit of a struggle. She didn't want it, but she needed it, and it causes all kinds of side effects, and yeah, but the pain is too much to not take it in her
absolutely,
situation.
absolutely,
Yeah.
absolutely.
Yeah, interesting. It really was being seeing that death that close up, and you were saying about wanting to know the future. That was my thing. I was always asking them, "How am I gonna know?" Because 'Cause I've never been around death before. This is my very first time, and I was in charge. I'm like, how am I going to know what's going to happen? My biggest fear was who am I going to be in that moment? Am I just going to completely fall apart? What is so many like fears? And I remember this one night, I was listening to Spotify and they'll just throw things into your playlist depending on what genre you're in. And this song came on, and I'll never forget the song. It was called Farewell. It was by some group called Echo River. And it's just this really beautiful, haunting, ethereal piano piece. And I grew up taking piano lessons. My mom played the piano by ear. And I'm laying in my childhood bedroom, and this just wave of sobbing just comes over me. But the hidden gift of that moment was I thought, okay, this is what this is going to feel like. And it sucks. But now I know I can get through it.
Intense but survivable. That's the slogan.
Oh my God. Yes, it is intense, but survivable. Right. And then you do. And look, here we are, right? Years
Mhm.
later.
And this is now just a short period after for you. I found like year 3 was pretty rocky, year 6 you go through different because it's like our psyches are ready to deal with some of the different issues. Like, my mother in so many ways was so dear to me that it's hard for me to see her in a more critical way. Now that some time has passed, I can permit myself to start really making those distinctions, and especially as I see myself becoming so much like her, as I'm sure I've always been, but, when you really start seeing it when you start seeing it,
Yeah. I call
it's
that
wild,
metamorphosis.
including all the what, mother morphs.
That's
That's fun.
but yeah.
That's funny. Another hidden gift of loss, let's see. So, yes, it got me esoteric. I also recognize that to a certain. Oh, so after he passed away, I don't know, I think that you might be a little young for this, but back in the day, in 1995, you had to pay by the minute for America Online for dial-up internet.
Oh, yeah.
Okay,
I
so you
remember that.
remember this, that's good, and so I remember and so after my father passed away, which was 9 months from that birthday dinner, shall we say, when he said he had cancer, about 9 months, pretty much to the day,
Mm.
that he passed away. Oh, and by the way, all those people who wrangled who sent the things, some people even backdated some employment records so that he could get to City of Hope and have the best treatment so that he'd be
Oh.
eligible for their insurance and things like that.
Mm.
So many things were made possible, shall we say, by people coming together. And so after that period of time, I was a teacher and we had this crazy, wonderful, the best schedule I ever had in my entire life, which allowed for a whole bunch of kids to get onto one campus, but it made for a longer day and a shorter year.
Oh, that's good. Yeah.
So we had to slog through 8 weeks and then we could get 4 weeks off. And it was 8 weeks on, 4 weeks off all year long, which was like unbelievable.
Yeah.
And I had those 4 weeks off, and it was right after my father had passed away, and I really pretty much didn't leave the house, and I was reading cards, and I was on America Online, and they only had, like, chat rooms at this point, and it was just basically like a little dialogue bubble, and it'd be like, "Hey, how you doing?" And somebody else
Yeah.
is like, "How you doing?" You know, so
I know.
so I got on there, and I started saying, "Hey, I'm doing tarot reading, serious only, takes about 45 minutes, let me know." Somebody would pick it up and say, "I'm up," and so then we'd go into a little room, you'd have to go
Mhm.
find a little chat room or something, and then I would say, "Okay, give me a number between 1 and 78 to represent yourself." Okay, and they would and
Mhm.
I'd count out that card, and then I had room on my little, like, wrist pad thing for 5 cards,
Mhm.
and so I would get him to give me 5 cards. If you were sitting in front of me, you'd be picking the cards.
Yeah,
All
exactly.
interactive.
Yeah.
And so that's to defeat people's cynicism or at least have them, be participatory. It doesn't matter how it really works, but you have to defeat the logical mind to a certain degree by
Yeah.
including it in the process and the odds.
Yes.
I would do that, and then so there's nobody there except this little thing, and so I
Mhm.
would just look at that and I would just start typing, and they'd be like, "That's amazing. How did you know that? Those are my exact words," or whatever the case may be, and I don't claim to be psychic, but I do flow some words. That seems to be something I have, and so I try to get myself out of the way to a certain degree and let the words and the expressions flow. Because oftentimes the cards, as you know, are represented in metaphor and slang and all kinds of things are they're all over those cards, and so there's so much we could do with cards. You might have a delightful idea for a module that we could include in our thing, some kind of a thing, and maybe that's about loss and the processes and grief and things like that, because it is a process,
Yeah.
and it's not a linear process. It's much more loopy.
Mhm. Oh, yeah. It's so true.
Yeah.
Wow. So that
That's when I started trusting myself, and then I would just, like and then you get a little ego about it, and people are like, "Why don't you come to my party? You can read cards." And yet they're not inviting you because they want you at the party. They want you to just be the novelty at the party. I'm like,
yeah.
that was the only party I was getting invited to, so I was eating up. And nobody tends to come to my parties, at least in the past, so we'll have to change that for the future. And, well, anyway, and then I taught school for 100 years, and I worked in the school district, and so I had a dual life where I would be studying these
Mm.
things on the side, and then doing this kind of literally curriculum instruction, professional development, policy, all that kind of stuff in
Mhm.
LA.
Wow,
Yeah.
so cool. Oh.
Meeting the right and now I have to come I've gotta come out to all my friends professionally, so
Yeah, that's a Jeremy. That's great. Oh, wow. This has been really delightful. I'm really looking forward to being on your show
Oh, I look
next
forward to
week.
having you on there. It's
Yeah,
wonderful, and you're welcome whenever you wanna come on down, it'll be a lot of fun, so I thank you for letting me be here on this show, and I look forward to all of our future dealings.
absolutely. Wonderful.
Really
All right.